All right, so you're gonna need a piece of paper and something to write with. You can write it in the notes section of your book. Does anyone need a book?
Yeah.
There are also some more on the back table if anybody needs them.
Oh, you need a book? You're gonna have, yeah. Back table, back table. I'm sorry, I went for 4. So if you've been in class, we're going to start with a little class work, and then at the end, you're going to have a little homework that's related. So if you don't write down what you're supposed to in the beginning, and you have a bad memory, you might be struggling. So. All right. So your assignment is, just write this down. You don't have to say it out loud. I want you to think about either your wife, your daughter, your mom, or a close friend that's female. So I feel like everyone can relate at this point. It could be a significant other. I want you to write down, think of them, just pick one. Write down one thing, one like characteristic about her that you think is unique.
What was the question?
That we don't like about her, or that we do like about her?
One thing that you think is unique.
One characteristic that you think is unique. It ideally should be positive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought that was like assumed. Yeah.
When you say unique, you mean like something that nobody else has?
Correct.
Something that everybody else has.
Nobody else has.
Oh, yes. Nobody else has. Something is unique or rare. We could say rare. Write it down so you remember it. Rustin doesn't want to see anybody see his answer. No cheating.
I don't want to be swell-headed,
Oh, okay. All right. So if you haven't written it down yet, go ahead and finish writing it down. But tonight we're going to talk about women. And when we think about gender roles, we often have some specific ideas, right? Coffee?
This one's
Oh.
thing still.
Yes. So over the centuries, views have shifted greatly, right? As far as what people think are gender roles, and even you look at the last 50 years, and there is a huge shift as well. Sometimes the shift is good, sometimes it's not, and there's obviously a variety of what people think when they think of gender roles. So when it comes to women, the old saying of women should be at home barefoot and pregnant is really one of those things that is mostly, maybe a point if you want to maybe annoy or a modern day female. That's likely what you're going to get, right? Most people don't really enjoy that. So you can easily offend someone, right? So, but the reality is of where our, perceptions of who women are, as well as who men are, largely come from what surrounds us, right? So when I was doing research, I saw a lot of like old advertisements that are very sexist. And I chose not to put any in the PowerPoint. You're welcome. But in general, like we are very influenced by the media. We're very influenced by the families that we grew up in and their perceptions of both women and men. We are influenced by the environment around us, maybe even the age that we grow up in. and just society in general. So we have all of these influences that are shaping who we are, right? And not just about this, obviously about a lot of other things, but this is what we're talking about tonight. And a lot of times we're influenced in ways that we don't even realize, right? And maybe we don't even notice until someone points something out, or maybe, we've lived 20 or 30 years and we don't even recognize that we have seen something this certain way the entire time. So from the very beginning, right, all of these views have been shaped by all of these different things. So tonight, we're specifically going to talk about women, and we're going to look at the beginning of Exodus. If you did your reading, Exodus 1 and 2. We're going to focus on the women in the story and how they responded in a time of adversity. So the point is not to share stereotypes or to put anyone in a box, right? But the goal is to specifically talk about the role of women in this story in Exodus and to examine how we can see people for who they are and how we can see them for who they are becoming, striving to become, right? We'll talk about characteristics that don't necessarily just apply to one gender, right? Because the women in the group might relate to one specific characteristic, but in the same way, or in a different way, men might relate to the same characteristic, right? They're not all women are only these things or men are only these things. And so I want you to keep an open mind as we go throughout this and be honest with yourself of, I relate to this in this way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start out with our resident historian, Allie. And we are going to look at how history has influenced what we or our ancestors believe about women. So we are going to whiteboard it. Are you guys ready? Because this is audience participation time.
Yes. Okay, so whiteboard's going to come in a minute. I'm going to first go off of some very broad spectrum things and ideas. And one of the first things I want to talk about is the actual evidence that we have of what women's lives were like throughout history. Because there's a problem with this evidence. It's that we have very little of it. And this is for many, many reasons. Some of it is because women mainly didn't write, and so we don't have any books that are ascribed to women because women weren't supposed to be the ones writing. They typically didn't have positions of power, but I will counter that later. And there's also this concept of looking at evidence and just assuming that it came from a man instead of taking the time to look through and see if it's a woman who wrote it, or even if there are cases where archaeologists have found remains. I specifically can remember one that was a Viking warrior, that they found these remains of this warrior and they just assumed that it was a man. And then later on they did genetic testing and they found out that it was a woman. And a lot of this stuff hasn't been studied because people just assume that, no, a woman didn't do this, this has to be a man. We don't need to see what gender it was because that's just the way it is. And scientists are now looking at these things and challenging that concept and asking that question. So there's a lot of old evidence that is being examined in new ways. Same thing about women being able to write. There were, especially back in Egypt, there were women scribes and women who wrote books and novels that were ascribed to a man because a woman couldn't write. The thing that I think of most of the time with that is like the Bronte sisters. For a while, they wrote under pseudonyms of a man so that they could actually get published, and then later on changed back to their actual names. So, in that vein, a lot of stuff I'm going to say is how we know these cultures today. It might change later on. There's always new evidence cropping up. There's always archaeologists working and digging and finding out new things. So this is just, in my research, what has been figured out or asked about currently. I'm going to work backwards. So, a lot of our concepts of women come from Greece and Rome. And I call this the Greco-Roman culture because a lot of it is very similar and they kind of intertwine and go with each other. So in a broad spectrum, the Greco-Roman view of women was that they were very inferior to men. Aristotle even is quoted as saying that a woman is an unfinished man. There was an idea that women were just not as far evolved as men, that all of that stuff. So because of these concepts, women were not allowed hardly any privileges. They were actually kept often in a separate room in the home, and whenever a husband brought his friends over, they couldn't come into that room. They had to go into their own room so that the men could have their men time and the women were locked away. They had to have permission from a male relative or a husband to go out of the house and do anything. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own property, they couldn't be a witness in a legal case, all kinds of stuff. I have found this interesting because I didn't know this before. In Greece and Rome, a woman had to be veiled whenever she went outside. Did not know that, something new I found out, thought it was interesting. So that is what a lot of, at least for me, this was the idea that I had of how ancient civilization worked. So that women were locked away and men did most of the stuff. But then when I got further back in history and I started looking at Egypt, I found that Egypt was almost exactly the opposite. Women had a lot of rights, not complete freedom, but a lot of rights in Egypt. There are many laws and court cases showing women giving testimony. They were trustworthy enough to say, hey, I know what happened in this situation. Legally, here's my opinion. They could own property. They had the right to divorce their husbands if they wanted to. And after that, they could still keep their house. They could still keep their children. A single woman could adopt a child. Trying to think of if there was anything else interesting. A lot. They didn't have to have permission to go out. There's actually stories of Greek women who came to Egypt after Alexander the Great took over, and they were so amazed at seeing these women going out and about without a man accompanying them that they started to rebel against their husbands and fathers because they wanted that freedom. It's really cool. There's also one of the first female doctors in Greece came to Egypt to study to be a doctor because that was already normal there. Another random cool thing.
So was they also allowed to hold office in Egypt?
So, sometimes. There were female pharaohs, even as far back as the Middle Kingdom. One of the first ones was Hatshepsut in the Middle Kingdom, earlier in the Middle Kingdom. So that's also a thing of, we don't know precisely when the Exodus happened. Some people put it in the New Kingdom and some people put it in the middle, but regardless, there was a female pharaoh who reigned before the Exodus happened. Don't know exactly how close it was. I think there were like 19 in total. There were women who had high religious office, prophetesses and priestesses and different things like that. And there were women scribes. That was also important. The ratio from the evidence that we have is still that it was predominantly men, but women did hold some offices. Anybody else got questions about Egypt or Rome or Greece?
Yeah, I think this is amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So that is the area that we are set in, is Egypt at this time. Now that I've talked about those type of cultures, we're going to switch over to the story, and we're just going to take it from the text and break it down and see what we come up with.
All right, so we're in Exodus 1, 15 through 22, if you want to read with me. Verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, When you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this, and let the male children live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them." So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied, and they grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." All right, so we're going to break this up into the different women in the story. So we're going to start with the midwives because they are introduced first. And so this is the participation part. So Allie's going to whiteboard it.
And you all are my spell check.
Should we start with you already spelled shipra wrong?
Ship's a ship.
Yeah, it's a
There's an
struggle.
H after the
All right, so what we want to know is, after reading the story, when you think about the midwives, when you see them in the story, what characteristics do you notice?
Feared God.
Okay, they feared God.
More than they feared the king or
Mm-hmm.
Confident.
What?
Confident?
Confident?
They were confident enough to tell the Pharaoh what they,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's true. Or maybe bold.
bold. That's a good one.
What?
Praise the Lord.
I find it interesting that they were willing to lie.
Yeah.
Thank you, man.
The deception coming back into the game again.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But if they were Hebrews,
That was tough to pull that back.
is it okay to lie when it preserves life?
But they weren't Hebrews.
Ah, ooh. My research says otherwise.
Oh yeah, that's the Hebrew midwives.
It does. I did with the, well,
Yeah.
Ali and I probably slightly disagree on this. There's a lot of evidence in this article. We both read the same article, and I walked away with one answer, and she walked away with the other view of are they Hebrew or not. And I walked away saying, yes, I do believe that they're Hebrew based on the historical argument, and she walked away the other way. So
Does the text say Hebrew?
it does say Hebrew midwives, but
This translation says Hebrew midwives.
yeah.
In the article, it says that it depends on the vowels that you put in of the original Hebrew text, whether there's a definite article or not.
Well, even if they were Hebrew by birth, they are by action, aren't they? Especially back then when they were doing
Seems like a more serious offense to, if you're Egyptian, to lie to Pharaoh.
Loyal.
Well, they also.
Loyal? If they're Hebrew, yes.
Daniel.
I just wanted to know what, can
United.
I pull up the scripture that was up?
Yeah. Bobby, can you pull the scripture up?
I just wanted to know what it was.
The second part or first part?
Uh,
It's 2 slides.
What was the second part?
Well, Allie, back then, did they have many, did they have a lot of Egyptian God-fearers?
Yeah, that's.
Because they said, I mean, if they weren't Hebrew, they were God-fearers.
So that was the part of the article that we both read that made me think that they might be Egyptian, because part of the Mishnah. So there were conflicting things in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and there are some rabbis who list Shiphrah and Puah as among the women who were not Israelites who feared God. So like the foreigner God-fearers. And then there are other rabbis who say, no, they were definitely Hebrew. There are even some that think that Shiphrah, who are actually Miriam and Yocheved.
So,
There's a lot.
That's a stretch.
Right.
I
That's
would say
what
that's
we
a-
both walked away
This
thinking
ratchet
that.
stretch,
Right.
I
if you
think.
just keep it at whether or not they're Hebrew or not, if they're not Hebrew, then why would it be a lie that they said that?
They said that they would kill the babies and then they didn't kill the babies.
Right.
And they said that the women had the babies before they got there.
Right.
Okay.
And that was
Oh,
the
okay,
lie.
that's good. Okay, that's it.
Well, what's their name? Is their name an Egyptian name, or is it a Hebrew name?
So that is, I think I remember the article saying that they were Egyptian names, but I also remember somebody saying like, no, they're Hebrew because it could mean this. So I
Right.
think there was,
All right, so we
nobody
don't know.
knows.
Right.
Wait,
We
in the
should
last
probably
verse-
go forward knowing
Yes.
they were God-fearers, whether they
Yeah.
were
But in the
Hebrew
last
or not.
in the last verse, he says that he's gonna kill all of the
Male
sons
God.
to
Right.
the Hebrews. Is that out of punishment to the women who, like, did he find out that they like saved the?
So Pharaoh's original plan was to have these two midwives who he knew worked with the Hebrew women to kill all of the babies. He wasn't going to have the army do it or whoever else. He was just going to have them do it, and that way it would be kind of sneaky. Is my impression of what it was. And then when they came back and said, no, we didn't do it, and did the lie of the Hebrew women have their babies before we get there, that's when he changed plans and went to, okay, all you guys go and take all the babies and throw them in the river. Okay. So, a couple of things that I want to add to this one that I thought were interesting historically was one, because of that, Pharaoh considered these two women, first of all, capable of murder, which I thought was interesting. But one of the main things I found interesting was that Pharaoh recognized midwives as a profession. Like, he knew who held these jobs. They were considered an actual job. This was what they did every day, and had them carry out a task. So that is a recognition of women as job holders and being capable of doing things that he would also have men do.
On that verse that you're talking about, so 16, it says when you serve as midwife. When I saw the word serve, I thought about that, and I gotta assume that they either came across as helpful, or like a nurse today is compassionate, or there to serve, there to be, I don't want to say humble necessarily, but I thought of that from one of your adjectives up there.
Yeah.
That they were at least servant-minded somehow. And I don't mean to assume too much about them, but
I like that.
it's still not always the.
So wait, did we discuss why? I guess this is off topic and not the general point here. Why the babies were being killed again?
That's earlier, in the beginning of Exodus 1.
Okay.
The Pharaoh felt that the Hebrews were getting too numerous and were going to be a challenge to his power.
Okay.
They could overpower the Egyptians, so he wanted to cut off the line.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah. That makes
It's interesting that they saved the girls. So
Not interesting that they did just, the Pharaoh did just the opposite of what China did. They just, they went after the men instead of after the women. And neither one of them worked out too well. I don't know. Sometimes it's interesting.
All right, we're going to move on to the second passage. So we're going to read Exodus 2, 1 through 10, and then we're going to talk about the rest of them. So, Shauna, would you read Exodus 2, 1 through 10?
Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank, and his sisters stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I drew him out of the water."
Okay, so Moses' mom is named Jochebed, so that's who we're gonna go with next. So what characteristics do you see in Jochebed?
Resourceful.
Caring.
Deceitful.
Courageous. Courageous.
And she's all pick words that Allie can't spell.
What was the last one?
Courageous.
Courageous.
But if he, it's okay.
What did I spell wrong?
I want to say this.
Okay, somebody correct me.
Here,
Okay,
Stop.
this is how it works at work, you guys, don't worry.
it does.
C-O-U.
Okay, I'm good.
I think for her to keep him for 3 months must have been like, I don't know, must have been really hard. Like attaching herself to him for a little while and then letting him go after that instead of just, deciding right away just take him. But gave him enough nourishment that probably she wanted to be the one
Yeah.
to do that.
Well, faithful. I feel like it had to have taken a lot of faith to put your child in a basket and stick it in the river. Faith or just surrender to fate.
She's crafty.
Crafty.
Yeah, she whipped up a basket and whatever.
Which was not altogether uncommon. It is known in history
I want
that.
to say she was humble. Because for her to, what she was saying about, here she sees her child with another woman, someone who has really dealt really hard with him, and then to humbly, submit to God's plan to spare his life, and this is the way, and she couldn't have. I mean, that's huge.
And really likely knowing she only gets him for a certain time.
That's it.
And was that time defined?
When the other woman said so.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, on this birthday, they wouldn't have known when his birthday was anyway. So the reality is she was probably living in waiting.
Maybe maybe another word to use besides humble, but when I see somebody like that's huge. That's just so huge for her to be able to stay strong, not give up the fact that that's her child, not lose it at any moment, because of the emotional, part of it. I mean, that's
Tough. Like, that's just tough to have to do that. That's hard. But I think she just wanted her child to survive, so she had to do what she had to do.
She's devoted. She got an eye on
Do we know, Abby or Allie, do you know, that in any of your research, was Moses ever given a different name from the mother and father? And is Moses a Egyptian name then that was adopted by the Jews, or?
So there's that one's kind of complicated. I don't know of any other name. So there is a theory that Moses did have another name, and because it was common in Egypt to name a child the son of whatever god, and the name for child was similar to Moses. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. It's like, so like Ramses is son of Ra. So Ra, and then however you spell it, the Nz's part is son of. So there's a theory that he had the name son of some other god, and then whenever he went back to the Hebrew people, they just took off that god's name and made it Moses. And it just so happens that those letters correspond to the Hebrew word for drawing out of the water. But that's just one theory.
Must be God's plan.
Yep.
Just have to live with that.
All right, so let's go to Pharaoh's daughter. What characteristics do you see in her?
Witch.
What?
Compassionate. Witch. With a W. Witch.
Yeah, no, I heard you.
Okay.
I don't know, I think.
Why do you see that in her?
Maybe she did. She saved the baby.
So, okay, so what
Because that's
characteristic?
what the Ten Commandments should
What?
be.
Compassionate.
Okay.
But why that one?
Why what?
Why that one? They were killing them. They were killing all kinds of.
That was the other one, they were throwing the rest out in the river, and that one, there was still alive.
He was in a basket.
We'll talk about that when we get to Miriam.
I think independent, like she's outright rebelling against her father's decree to kill everybody, and now how's she gonna suddenly explain that, oh hey, I have this new baby after what they say 3 years or whatever it was. I mean, she's taken a stand for, because she had compassion. That's why I didn't quite get where you were going with that. I mean, sorry.
He doesn't always have to be right. It's okay.
Thanks, Abby. I appreciate that. Close your ears, baby. Don't get those kind of things.
She was powerful.
Powerful?
Yeah, she had servants, and she's from his faith.
I'm gonna brag on my wife for a second. I want to say she was similar to Clara. So someone who has no trust in his own perspective, so not his perspective.
Hey, my perspective was not a cloud.
No, you're
Independent, powerful, I like it.
no. I think it was someone who is a part of a culture that she has decided to choose a different view of meaning of life. That there are certain things and culturally placed that she had decided, no, I don't see it that way, and I don't think that's right. And I don't really know how to put that one into words. Well, it is independent, but it's not
It's a free
independent. It's a higher form of thinking. I
Like
think it's
free
higher.
thinking or countercultural or principled.
Absolutely,
I'm not like
Egyptians
free-thinking
looked down
things, but-
upon.
Maybe it was all selfish reasons. Maybe she wanted a baby. I mean, not like selfish in a bad way, but maybe she wanted a baby and she had the power to be able to
Maybe she could
Yeah.
take this child, and because the child was on the river, and
Yeah.
maybe she believed it was from the gods that she got this.
Adoption was normal at this time. Just so everybody
Yeah, but
knows.
was
This
it
wasn't like a
normal
really
between the
weird.
cultures because the Egyptians looked down on the Hebrew.
Like, how do you explain that? Like, just all of a sudden, hey, I found a baby in the
I think she was counting.
Is she-
Was she naive?
Well, the Nile was known to have brought life. It represented life, right? And so here comes a baby out of the river. I mean, she could have thought to herself, this is all from the gods. The gods have given me a child.
Yeah.
She'd been
Well, I
naive.
mean, That wouldn't have been.
But I was thinking, what about in this situation? It represents death, at least looking at it scripturally, because did she not know that all these babies were being killed?
Drown.
Yeah.
She had the baby's sister and the baby's mother involved in this. Apparently to.
Well, but she didn't necessarily know the mom was involved, right?
That's my point.
Yeah.
That part of being naive. I mean,
It is possible that she had no idea that the child was Hebrew. Like, it would be a little bit of a stretch depending on how much she knew of what her dad was doing. But the Hebrews have been living in Egypt for a very long time at this point.
Doesn't it say that?
Yeah, it says.
And it opened it up and saw the child and see the baby wept. And she said, she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the children of the Hebrews."
I forgot about her.
Do you think it's?
I wonder if that's visual or if it's the fact there's a baby in the river.
No, it probably would have been wrapped with, something, that identified it as. Yeah.
Or he was 3 months old, so he would have been. Well, they didn't have that rule yet, did they?
Right.
Circumcision?
Was there anything
They didn't have
against
that rule yet, so.
Yeah.
Hebrews and like intermarrying? Was there any illegalities there? Like, would it be possible? Because I know, like in America, we say like this race, but that's really
Yeah.
like a dumb way of thinking. Like everybody.
So at some point,
marries everybody.
there is, like, if you remember in the stories of like Ruth and other people, they say, "Oh, you wicked person for going and marrying an outsider."
Sure.
But that is also later.
Because if they've been living that long in the same land, I mean, it just makes sense that there's going to be people intermarrying.
It's possible. We don't know for sure.
All right, we're gonna keep moving.
Okay, sorry.
We gotta keep moving. All right, Miriam. What characteristics do you see in Miriam?
Special. And obedient. Absolutely. To obey her mom and to do that with her brother.
Possibly disobedient if her mother didn't know she was across the river doing that. Because it didn't necessarily say that did it say that she told her to?
No. I don't know.
Stood at a distance.
I think she's curious.
Curious?
Well, devoted, probably.
Miriam was the one that like took care of
She
me.
was jealous.
Oh, no, that's not.
Hebrews like covert.
Covert.
Miriam the spy.
She was a quick thinker.
Dun, dun,
She's the
dun,
one that
dun,
thought of her
dun,
mom.
dun, dun.
Yeah.
I just said
Actually conversed her.
Miriam was the one that she gave him to take care of.
Miriam was the one who went up to Pharaoh's daughter and said, "Do you want me to go find a nurse from the Hebrew women
Pretty
for the
bold.
baby?"
Bold.
Bold.
/ crazy.
Oh, gotcha. Then his sister.
Pharaoh's daughter named the baby.
I would not necessarily the word manipulative, but definitely very like. What word would you say? Like someone who controls a situation for a certain outcome.
Opportunistic.
Opportunistic. Yeah.
Somebody spell that for me when I write it.
Never heard of it.
OPP. ORTUNISTIC. Okay, we're gonna move on. I want to keep like pushing forward. So what I want to know is, and I'm gonna squash it all together to make sure that we have time. But earlier I talked about how, doesn't matter if we're women or men, that we can relate to some of these characteristics, right? And so I want to hear how you see yourself in this story. And it doesn't mean that you have to, obviously you haven't like taken on this roles unless someone's delivered a baby and I didn't know. But how do you relate to any of these things, right? Do you relate to the midwives because they stood up for their principles and their beliefs, and feared God more than Pharaoh, right? And they went against what he said. Do you relate to Jochebed, who was faithful and, allowed herself to let her child go and, trusted God for the outcome? Do you connect with Pharaoh's daughter, who was compassionate and took care of someone who needed help? Or do you find yourself like Miriam, who is, the protector, watching over those in need, right? Her brother in need. So where do you see yourself in this? Is there a characteristic that you connect to? Or maybe even, if you don't want to talk about yourself, something that you see someone else in the room representing.
I see my mom and Shifra and Kula. Just like, I liked how y'all described standing up for their beliefs, principled in beliefs. I see my mom that way. There's been situations where my mom was strong to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. When you ask that, how do you see other people? And you asked us, how do you see a woman in that? I think I see Sean all four of them at different times. You can identify that way as a mom or as a protector. I can see that. All four characters.
I don't see those in anybody. Things that I wrote down, I mean, I thought of Deborah, I thought of my mom, I thought of my grandma, and yeah, I see a lot of those characteristics in all of them. Sisters, people in the community.
Oh, I just felt like there was about ready to be something coming. This is a big list. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
It's a big list, but it crosses over, I think through all of them, different ones, But I don't think there's, what you're looking at there, the only thing that you'd see in gender, right, is the person portrayed, in the story. But all the description really, you see that in male and female. You don't see that
right.
as far as just on one gender or, the other.
That's my point. So where do you see yourself in this?
All over the board.
Okay.
Humble too.
Humble too.
The most humble in the room. There we go.
Honestly, that kind of threw me off guard because we've been talking about the different women and everything. And
Right.
asked,
I know it was a trap.
what do we see? Or, how do we see that in ourselves? I mean, there's some things there, but I've kind of had a hard time changing gears.
Uh-huh.
I think I could relate to Moses' mom. So
Jochebed.
Jochebed. Yeah. I just was like about to cry when you were reading that she let him go. Just because I can't even imagine that now, and I haven't even had my baby.
Mm-hmm.
But and then mom said faithful, if she was Hebrew and she believed in God and trusted her baby, who she had gotten to know in over 3 months and over her whole pregnancy, that she just entrusted God, with something that she couldn't control. And so she put him in a basket and didn't know where he was going to end up, But she had faith that God had a purpose for him. So, which made me curious, like, what did she mean when she looked at him and she saw that he was a fine child? Like, I hope it was, I don't know. I don't think it was just like, he looks good. He should be saved. Or there was like, I don't
just
know.
pretty.
Yeah, like, I wonder what she meant by that. Or if she firmly believed, I believe God has a purpose for him and it's not going to end today. You know, so I'm going to send him away in hopes that God has control over that.
Yeah.
So,
And to give a little more context about having a child at this time, like child mortality was still really high. So actually being able to have a healthy child was a big deal. And then you were entrusting that the children you were raising were going to take care of you when you got older. Like everybody lived in the same house together. It was generational. You needed to have children so that when you got old and couldn't do anything anymore, they could take care of you. It was like your insurance. So giving up some security, she still had Aaron and Miriam, but giving up security and giving up a child that she might have been trying for a long time is a very, very big deal.
Yeah, but they were taking the males anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she could have tried to hide him in her house for longer.
It makes me think, like, it's so specific how everything plays out. I wonder how much, if there were any at all, like, conversation that happened, you know, just between God and her about because that's so, like, it's, we see it, we read it, and it's like, oh yeah, like all this happens and it ends up being great. But like, how bizarre would that be? Like it leads me to think like there had to have been something, like some sort of initiation from someone telling her like, this is what you need to do. You know, like this is what God's will is. You know, even down to like, you know, I don't know. I wonder. But I don't know. I don't know. I just wonder.
Then you want to take into account how many years have they already been in slavery and have been crying out for God to save them. So, meaning that they didn't have someone there, you know, showing signs and wonders. And all this time they just, you know, all the years. You sure that's just not fables? You know, I mean, so when you talk about believing and not seeing and for how to do that. Okay.
Again, I believe it's still God's plan. It could be any other kid except Moses. It is like Jesus Christ. God's plan.
I think there's also something about women. I mean, obviously God created us male and female. There are differences. There's a lot of things that we could look at on this list and say, yeah, a man could do many of these things as well. But the fact that the story brings out all of these examples of women who took the risk, who saw the potential in the children, in this child in particular, is kind of interesting because women have you know, as a mother, you have something that you can give your child that a father can't. The same as a father has something that they can give a child that a mother can't, you know. But the ability to look into a child and to see that there's potential, that there's something there that, you know, a father can do that too, but I think it's interesting that we have these examples of that. At least four in this story. And of course we know how it turns out, so we know why, but
That's true, because it makes me think about I mean, there's no mention of Moses' father, right? There's no mention of like what his say would have been in it. But just imagining as a couple measuring what's at stake here, it's like, well, if they catch us with a baby, we'll all be killed, right? Like that kind of stake is terrible, something I never want to have to decide between. But I honestly think that this Moses' mother, I mean, it's not something that, it was like, I think what was at stake was any moment now, like Pharaoh's guards could come in and all of us would be dead. But I see her as just like a very brave, courageous woman that had some hope for this baby, some hope for this life, and she understood the preciousness of a life, you know, definitely more than the Egyptian guards, that's for sure. So I think her understanding of what life is and then her courage to stand up for that's really, really remarkable despite circumstances, despite what's at stake. Just inspiring.
Well, since we're talking about women, I think that's a specific trait women have even more so than men. Just the ability to understand and to, in a way, kind of give life to something. You know, just to see, like you were saying, like to see something in Moses and to see, you know, like, because I know, like, logically it makes sense. Like, if my entire family can die because of this one child that we have, it makes complete sense. Remove him so the rest of us can live. And I hate to say that, but I see how that could easily be something that people turn to. Whereas a woman, I know, like, would not see that way. And I think that's something God has given a woman to see, not just in their children, but also in their husbands. You know, like there are certain ways that you see women love their husbands, and you're like, how do you still love that man? You know, and it's because they see something greater and they fight for that. I think women are given a specific kind of warrior sense ability in a spiritual level that fighting for a baby's life like that, it wouldn't have happened that way if it were men. It just wouldn't have. It had to be women. That's my thoughts.
I think reading through the story, I mean, reading it several times over the past month or so, I realized that a lot of times we skip this part. You know, these women who really like put it all on the line, we skip it and we're just like, oh, Moses was saved and he became this, you know, with all of his, you know, faults and great things, you know, everything that he was able to accomplish. But we missed this part, and you know, me included. And so I like that, you know, we focus on this week because we just get to look at something different and be reminded. And I don't even know how many times, maybe never in Scripture is there another time when there are this many like women players in a story. Like I'm just thinking about, you know, all of the kids are learning about women in the Bible right now. And in general, it is like a single woman, you know, like mostly acting on her own in the stories. And so this is probably the most like collective, I guess, we see that they, you know, everyone had their part, everyone had their role, and the story wouldn't have ended up the same way without each of them playing their part. And I think it's just a good reminder that, you know, we as a community, we have a lot of different people with a lot of different characteristics, a lot of different traits, and we have the ability to see people maybe as something that they have been before, or even something that someone else has, you know, maybe given you a view. You know, if you don't know someone and you're like, oh, what are they like? You know, and then you're given this like view of them that is from one person, you know, or, you know, we're a community of growth and we all have pasts. And if you've been here very long, you probably know some of people's pasts, right? And some of it is probably great and some of it is probably not so great. And so tonight is like the challenge. You know, we see a lot of good things. We actually, you know, we got some negative things up there too, maybe. But the challenge tonight is really to be able to see people for who they are and maybe who they're becoming, and to encourage that. and not get so focused on maybe the influences that we have around us or the views that we've had in the past, that we only see people as who they have been, but that we are constantly encouraging and, and like I don't know, there's like the saying that it takes a long time for someone to see any change in a person who's trying to change, right? And it's hard. But maybe just a point to, when you see that, to recognize it and to affirm it and to encourage and, like, I see this in you. I know that you are trying to be something different, and you are working on yourself. And the take-home question is the beginning question, right? And maybe you can expand it, based on what we've talked about today. But your wife or your daughter or your mom, significant other, friend who is a female, and the unique characteristic that you wrote down, is that the one that is what you wrote down the same thing that you're thinking now, or are you thinking something different? Is there's something that, going through this exercise that you're like, no, this is it. This is what it is. This is who she is. This is how she has, maybe changed a life. So thank you for taking part in our exercise. This is like way more than Allie and I even had like on our paper. So it's cool to just see everyone's different views of reading the stories and seeing what you pull from, who these women are. And it was fun. I think it was fun to do this together. So